Very well, historical lunatics. Hit subscribe before your ears become collateral damage in the dumbest war of the 18th century. Because yes, today we're diving into a real international conflict started by an ear, not a metaphorical one. An actual, fleshy, detached human ear, proudly waved before Parliament like a biological PowerPoint. Boom. It's 1738. You're Robert Jenkins, British sea captain, recently earless courtesy of an angry Spanish coast guard, and somehow you've just become the spark for a full-scale colonial war. You wake up on your ship, the Rebecca, anchored off the Spanish Main, with that horrible feeling that something is missing. Spoiler, it's part of your head. Moments ago, a Spanish Coast Guard captain named Juan de Leon Fandiño accused you of smuggling, which, to be fair, you probably were, and decided that due process meant amateur surgery. His blade flashes, and suddenly your ear becomes international evidence. He waves it like a trophy, snarling that you should take it to your king. You would protest, but you're a bit light on ears right now. The air reeks of salt, sweat, and rum-soaked panic. Your crew stares at you like you've just invented performance art. Somewhere, a sailor quietly vomits. You press a rag to what used to be your left ear and try not to faint. But the 18th century Caribbean isn't big on anesthetics or sympathy. Infection, almost guaranteed. But more importantly, you're now the proud owner of a casus belli, a fancy Latin phrase meaning reason to start an absolutely ridiculous war. As the Rebecca limps back toward England, your ear, pickled in brandy, because even human remains deserve a stiff drink, becomes both cargo and symbol. You can practically hear the future historians groaning already. This isn't about justice, it's about timing. Britain has been itching for a fight with Spain since the last treaty told them to stop stealing sugar, slaves, and gold. Your misfortune is just the perfect excuse, wrapped in gauze. Weeks later, when you hobble into London, everyone treats you like the walking embodiment of imperial outrage. The story spreads faster than the plague. Brave British captain mutilated by cruel Spaniards. Never mind that you were caught red-handed smuggling goods into Spanish colonies. Details are for nerds, and outrage sells papers. Politicians start foaming at the mouth with patriotic fury. Pamphleteers sketch caricatures of you holding your ear, like a martyr holding a relic. The streets buzz with moral indignation and cheap gin. You're paraded through drawing rooms and taverns, retelling the story of your heroic suffering to anyone sober enough to listen. The crowd doesn't see you as a smuggler. You're now Jenkins, patron saint of justified violence. In every retelling, the ear gets larger, the Spaniards crueler, and the rum stronger. And so, by the strange alchemy of empire, your personal medical emergency transforms into a political movement. One ear, floating in brandy, will soon echo across oceans, stirring fleets and egos alike. You can almost hear the cannons already, though that might just be the tinnitus. You stand before the British Parliament, clutching a glass jar that used to contain pickles, but now houses your former ear. A shriveled, floating testament to the Empire's collective lack of chill. The room falls silent. Every powdered wig turns in unison. You might as well have walked in carrying the Holy Grail, except this one smells faintly of rum and decay. One MP gasps. Another mutters something about Spanish barbarity. The Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole, looks like a man who just realized this circus might ruin his entire foreign policy. He's been trying to keep the peace with Spain for years, but nothing kills diplomacy faster than a dismembered body part on display. You set the jar down on the table, and the room collectively leans in. For a brief, grotesque moment, your ear becomes Britain's most persuasive argument for war. Across the benches, the opposition erupts with patriotic theatre, William Pitt and his allies are suddenly defenders of honor, shouting about British liberty and Spanish cruelty. What they really mean is, more colonies, please. The newspapers lap it up. Woodcuts of your grim face and the floating ear appear everywhere. The London Gazette runs headlines like Captain Jenkins and the Spanish outrage, while tavern songs turn your misfortune into a catchy anthem. Somewhere in Fleet Street, a journalist writes that your ear cried out for vengeance. It didn't, of course. It mostly just floated. The whole affair turns into a PR campaign worthy of a modern social media scandal. Politicians declare their outrage in speeches designed for applause, not accuracy. The public eats it up. Within days, effigies of Spanish officers burn in the streets, and children pretend to lose imaginary ears for fun. Merchants toast your bravery. Broadsheets sell illustrations of your dismemberment as collectibles. Britain's outrage economy is booming. Walpole, poor man, tries to stall the inevitable. He mutters something about prudence and avoiding unnecessary war. No one listens. Reasonable diplomacy is the least clickable stance in history. The crowd outside Parliament chants for revenge. Pubs rename their house ale the Jenkins Ear Brew. You've become both meme and martyr, the 18th century version of viral fame, achieved through partial dismemberment. You realize, standing amid the noise, that this isn't about you anymore. You're not a man, you're marketing material, a living headline for Britain's imperial ambitions. And as Parliament debates whether to spill blood in your honor, you can't help but think, if this is justice, it sure smells like brandy and opportunism. You were never the story, just the thumbnail. Behind your unfortunate ear lay a centuries-old feud wrapped in molasses and greed. Britain and Spain weren't fighting over honor. They were fighting over sugar, the white gold of the Caribbean. Every cube stirred into a London teacup was soaked in blood, sweat, and unregulated commerce. And Britain wanted more plantations, more trade routes, more free enterprise, meaning less Spanish paperwork. See, the Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, gave Britain a lucrative contract called the Asiento, the exclusive right to sell enslaved Africans in Spanish America. But British merchants, being British merchants, weren't content sticking to human trafficking alone. They started smuggling everything else: rum, cloth, weapons, even fake documents. The Spanish coast guards, the guardacostas, were technically supposed to stop them. What they actually did was chase down any British ship in range, board it, steal its cargo, and sometimes, as in your case, casually edit its captain's anatomy. So your little ear incident. It wasn't an isolated atrocity. It was one of dozens of violent encounters between smugglers and Spanish patrols. But Parliament needed a simpler story, one that didn't involve illegal trade, imperial hypocrisy, or enslaved people dying by the thousands in Caribbean heat. You were perfect, a British everyman mutilated by foreign villains. Much better PR than greedy merchant loses body part during colonial contraband dispute. Meanwhile, back in the Caribbean, the islands are buzzing. Jamaica, Barbados, and the Leewards are bursting with plantations that run on sugar and enslaved labor. Each ton of sugar brings London closer to addiction, economic and literal. By 1730, sugar is Britain's national obsession, feeding its sweet tooth and its capitalist arteries. The merchants lobbying Parliament aren't angry about your ear. They're angry that Spanish regulations are cutting into their profits. To them, war isn't revenge, it's an investment. And so, while pamphlets shout about Spanish tyranny, the real meetings happen in private clubs, where men in powdered wigs sip rum and calculate profits. They talk about God, king and country, but they mean cargo, credit, and colonies. Somewhere between those calculations, your name gets attached to a motion for war. In a few weeks, your ear will become the world's most successful marketing campaign, the kind that sells not products, but bloodshed. History will remember it as patriotism. Economists will recognize it as capitalism with better costumes. You, unfortunately, will remain the mascot of an empire that never met a moral it couldn't monetize. Welcome to the Caribbean, not the postcard version with turquoise waves and daiquiris, but the 18th century edition. Hot, diseased, and full of ships pointing cannons at each other for fun and profit. Spain claims nearly everything from Florida down to Panama, while Britain owns a handful of humid islands and an inflated sense of entitlement. The air smells of tar, salt, sweat, and empire, the four classic notes of colonial arrogance. The entire region is basically a geopolitical tinderbox floating on sugarcane and rum. Spanish forts glare across bays at British trading posts. Every cove hides a smuggler's sloop or a naval patrol pretending not to see one. Even the parrots have trust issues. You can't swing a cutlass without hitting someone arguing about tariffs or God's will. And in between the official empires, privateers, government pirates with paperwork, swarm like mosquitoes. One man's patriot is another man's thief, depending on whose flag is higher and whose bribe is bigger. Spain insists on keeping tight control over its colonies. Britain, naturally, interprets this as an affront to free trade, or more accurately, free theft. British merchants sneak goods into Spanish ports, Spanish ships chase them out, and occasionally someone loses a mast, a shipment, or an ear. Every boarding, every confiscation, adds kindling to the diplomatic fire. Reports flood back to Europe, each one a little more exaggerated, until it sounds like Spain is personally amputating every British sailor in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, the local population, enslaved Africans, indigenous peoples, and poor colonists, are the ones actually paying the price. Plantations churn out wealth for men who've never seen a cane field. Disease and brutality do the rest. But in London and Madrid, nobody cares about that. They care about honor, revenue, and who controls the next shipping lane. Every British tavern now echoes with angry talk about Spanish tyranny, while in Havana, Spanish officers mutter about English smugglers. Each empire believes it's the victim. Each captain thinks he's the hero. The Caribbean is no longer a trade zone. It's an overcrowded powder room waiting for someone to light the fuse. And that fuse, Jenkins, is you. Your jarred ear, passed around like a cursed relic, has made this chaotic, sweaty chessboard explode into full-blown war talk. The irony. Nobody in the Caribbean is surprised. They've been living on the edge of this explosion for decades. The only new thing is that Europe finally noticed, and now the whole world's about to catch fire. You've gone viral in 1738. No hashtags, no thumbnails, no influencers, just an army of pamphleteers, woodcut artists, and drunk balladeers weaponizing outrage one inkblot at a time. Your face, grim, noble, slightly confused, appears on broadsheets across London. Sometimes you're drawn heroically. Sometimes you look like a taxidermied potato. Accuracy doesn't sell. Emotion does. Every street corner hawker is shouting about Jenkins' ear, as if the cartilage itself were declaring war. Printers crank out exaggerated accounts faster than today's comment sections spread misinformation. In one version, you bravely defied the Spaniards. In another, you punched the captain before losing your ear in a duel of honor. In reality, you just bled a lot and tried not to faint. But that doesn't sell copies. Caricaturists make you a symbol of British virtue. a rugged sea captain standing tall while a sniveling Spaniard swings a blade labeled tyranny. The captions are pure gold. A noble ear for a noble cause, Britannia's martyr, cut but unbroken. Tavern songs pop up overnight, rousing tunes about your bravery, written by men who can't spell bravery. Soon, every pub has a Jenkins Ear ale, brewed with questionable sanitation and patriotic fervor. You've become a meme before memes existed. The Georgian public laps it up. London thrives on scandal and spectacle. Your tragedy is the perfect mix of gore and nationalism. Aristocrats debate your fate over sherry, while chimney sweeps reenact your mutilation for laughs. Even children play Jenkins and the Spaniard, a disturbing mix of tag and light assault. You're trending across all demographics, from the docks to the drawing rooms. The pamphlets get meaner, the songs louder, the caricatures nastier. Spain is now the villain of every story. The evil empire strangling British freedom and commerce. The reality of smuggling and colonial exploitation fades behind a wall of catchy outrage. It's politics by performance art, and the crowd demands an encore. You, meanwhile, are still broke, half-deaf, and probably infected. But none of that matters. You're a brand now, a patriotic mascot, a talking point for men in wigs who've never seen the sea. The British Empire has found its symbol, and it happens to be a jarred piece of you. By the time the public's rage reaches fever pitch, Parliament doesn't have a choice. The momentum is unstoppable. The headlines, the songs, the gossip, they've all built to a single, inevitable conclusion. The printing presses have done their work. The mob has chosen its storyline. All that's left is the war. And the punchline is that your 15 minutes of fame are about to cost thousands of lives. October 1739. Parliament officially declares war on Spain, and the crowd in London loses its collective mind. Bells ring, cannons fire in salute, and drunk merchants toast your name like you just personally avenged the nation. They're shouting for honor and justice, which in 18th century English means more trade routes and someone else's coastline. The War of Jenkins Ear is on, and it's somehow both a tragedy and a punchline. You stand there watching the celebration, jar still in hand, realizing the empire just committed to global bloodshed over your missing ear, or more precisely, over the right to keep smuggling sugar and slaves without Spanish interference. No one says that part out loud, of course. It's much nobler to scream about vengeance than tariffs. Every speech in Parliament sounds like a school play about patriotism written by lobbyists. Newspapers call it a righteous retaliation. Tavern songs rhyme ear with cheer. Caricaturists draw Britannia brandishing a sword shaped like an ear canal. London hasn't been this excited since gin was invented. The mob wants war because war sounds glorious when you're not the one who has to smell it. Prime Minister Walpole is miserable. He knows this is political suicide. They now ring the bells, he mutters, but they will soon be wringing their hands. He's right, but nobody listens to the guy warning about logistics when there are catchy slogans to shout. Across the Atlantic, Spain hears the news and collectively rolls its eyes. They've fought the British before. They'll do it again. Only this time, the battlefield isn't Europe. It's the fever-ridden, mosquito-choked Caribbean, where soldiers die faster from dysentery than bullets. The propaganda machine keeps spinning. Paintings depict noble captains sailing into glory, not vomiting over the rail in tropical heat. London investors fund patriotic ventures, which is code for war profiteering. The Admiralty brags about Britain's naval supremacy, conveniently forgetting that most of its ships are held together by splinters and superstition. You, meanwhile, are having the world's strangest existential crisis. You didn't mean to start a war. You just wanted someone to yell at Spain and maybe cover your medical bills. But now, thousands of men will die under the banner of your body part. Every cannonball fired in the Caribbean might as well have your name carved into it. The irony is complete. Britain has declared the dumbest flex in imperial history. A war of pride disguised as principle, launched in your honor and fueled by sugar, rum, and hypocrisy. The world thinks you're a hero. You just want your ear back, a quiet ship, and maybe a refund for the brandy you wasted preserving it. Enter Admiral Edward Vernon, the human embodiment of British arrogance wrapped in a naval uniform. The man has two great passions, rum and revenge. He's the kind of commander who could start an argument with a mirror and win. When the War of Jenkins Ear begins, he sees divine opportunity. Not to avenge you, of course, but to turn the Caribbean into his personal highlight reel. Vernon isn't just confident, he's evangelical about it. He claims he can take any Spanish port in the Americas with 6 ships only. London laps it up. Newspapers call him the Lion of the Seas. Parliament applauds. Somewhere, Walpole weeps quietly into his ledger. No one questions Vernon's logistics, because humility doesn't trend. The Admiral's ego has already set sail before his fleet even leaves Portsmouth. His orders are simple. Attack Spanish holdings, humiliate the enemy, and remind everyone that Britain rules the waves, even if half the fleet is drunk. Vernon's first target, Portobello, a small Spanish fortress on the coast of Panama. It's a sensible choice, lightly defended, symbolically important, and perfect for propaganda. He assembles his 6 ships only, a mix of worn-out vessels and overconfident sailors, all convinced this will be the Caribbean's greatest pub brawl. On deck, morale is high and hygiene non-existent. The smell is a mix of sweat, tar, spoiled salt beef, and existential optimism. Vernon paces the deck, issuing orders with theatrical flair. He has a special fondness for rum rations, the crew's daily escape from the realities of scurvy and boredom. In fact, he's the reason British sailors start mixing their rum with water and citrus juice, creating what will forever be known as grog. Congratulations. You're witnessing the birth of alcoholism with branding. Vernon's speeches are pure motivational chaos. Men, we sail not for plunder, but for glory. Followed immediately by, and a bit of plunder, obviously. His officers nod dutifully, secretly praying the mosquitoes kill them before the Spanish do. The fleet creaks westward through storms and sickness, chasing dreams of conquest and glory that smell suspiciously like rotting wood. By the time they reach the Caribbean, Vernon's confidence has inflated to atmospheric levels. He writes letters to London bragging about his inevitable victory before firing a single shot. This war, he declares, will show Spain her place. In hindsight, he's technically correct. He'll just be showing it from the bottom of several tropical harbors. Still, in that moment, under the blazing sun, with the wind snapping the sails and rum in everyone's bloodstream, Vernon feels invincible. He's about to make history. What he doesn't know is that history is waiting with a brick wall and a sense of humor sharper than any cutlass. Against all odds and basic logistics, Vernon actually pulls it off. November 1739. 6 British warships appear off the coast of Portobello, Panama, and unleash a storm of cannon fire that turns the sleepy Spanish outpost into confetti. The entire battle lasts less than a day. The Spanish garrison surrenders, the Union Jack rises over the smoldering ruins, and Vernon immediately begins composing letters to London that read less like reports and more like victory fan fiction. For Britain, this is the high point, both literally and intellectually. Portobello is small, strategically questionable, and humid enough to melt steel buttons. But none of that matters. Back in London, the newspapers go feral. "British valor triumphs," screams one headline. "6 ships defeat the Pride of Spain," declares another, omitting the fact that the Pride of Spain consisted mostly of 2 half-rotten cannons and a garrison the size of a pub quiz team. The public doesn't care. After years of trade disputes and patriotic build-up, they finally have their war trophy. And it comes with a catchy headline. The Admiralty Mince Medals reading, "He took Portobello with 6 ships." Only as if humility were a communicable disease. Pubs across England rename themselves the Portobello Arms, the Vernon Victory, and the Ear and Anchor. Somewhere, a marketing student in the afterlife takes notes. Vernon, drunk on fame and rum, becomes a living legend overnight. Parliament cheers his name. Merchants toast him with imported sugar punch. Poets write verses comparing him to Neptune, which is generous given his main achievement was demolishing a coastal warehouse. Even London's children chant rhymes about the mighty 6 ships, while their parents quietly invest in companies planning to conquer the rest of Spanish America. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, the mood is less festive. The victory smells like victory and rotting flesh. The tropical heat cooks corpses faster than anyone can bury them. Mosquitoes hold their own celebration, feasting on soldiers who think malaria is just a bit of a fever. Supply ships rot in harbor, the rum runs low, and half the crew discovers that triumph doesn't include sanitation. But Vernon doesn't care. He's sending dispatches to London faster than you can say propaganda. His letters drip with bravado. "I have humbled Spain with 6 ships only." Britain reads it as divine proof that empire is destiny. No one seems to notice that the Spanish Empire, though embarrassed, is still intact, and very, very angry. For the moment, though, Britain is euphoric. The pubs overflow, Parliament applauds, and your severed ear is now the unofficial mascot of national pride. The Empire believes it's unstoppable, which, as history loves to remind us, is usually the part right before everything collapses spectacularly. London can't stop celebrating. It's as if Portobello were the second coming, and Admiral Vernon had personally water-walked into the harbour. Parliament roars. Merchants clink glasses. Every tavern in Britain smells like spilled gin and delusion. The country convinces itself that Spain is finished, that 6 ships and 1 good headline have somehow ended a centuries-old empire. Strategic planning? Overrated. Britain's national mood is now 90% euphoria and 10% liver damage. Back in the Caribbean, Vernon's fleet is basking in the glow of its one-day miracle. Officers preen on deck, sailors get drunk enough to forget the mosquitoes, and everyone behaves as if the war were already over. Orders pile up unread, gunpowder spoils in the humidity, and nobody seems to notice that the Spanish are quietly regrouping just over the horizon. It's less a navy and more a floating after-party. The Admiralty in London feeds the fantasy. They rename ships, issue medals, and plan grand parades for battles that haven't even happened yet. Politicians talk about carving up the Spanish Main, drawing imaginary borders on maps between mouthfuls of mutton. The press publishes poems describing Vernon as the thunder of the tropics, while the man himself begins to believe it. He's already proposing to invade every port between Havana and Lima, preferably before the hangover hits. Meanwhile, reality has other plans. The unstoppable Royal Navy is rotting in tropical heat. Sails mildew, hulls leak, and men die faster than supplies arrive. Fever spreads through the ranks. Half the crew is delirious, the other half is drunk, and both believe that victory is a permanent condition. Discipline dissolves. Even the parrots on deck start repeating naval orders with mockery. The Spanish, watching from fortified ports, can hardly believe their luck. While the British compose victory odes, Spain reinforces Cartagena, Havana, and Santiago with cannons, men, and malaria. They know this is just intermission, and when the curtain rises again, the comedy will turn tragic. But London won't hear it. Back home, the war has become a musical, full of patriotic verses, roaring laughter, and zero understanding of logistics. The Empire is too busy throwing itself a party to notice the storm forming to the south. The carnival of complacency is in full swing, and the next act will wipe the smile, and probably most of the fleet, right off Britain's sunburned face. April 1741. The British Empire, drunk on the fumes of Portobello, decides to go big. Vernon now commands the largest amphibious invasion fleet the Atlantic has ever seen. Nearly 200 ships, 27,000 men, and enough rum to float another vessel. Their target, Cartagena de Indias, the crown jewel of Spain's Caribbean defenses. The plan: sail in, blast a few forts, declare victory, and head home before the tropical climate remembers it's fatal. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything. From the moment the fleet anchors off Cartagena, the city's commander, Blas de Lezo, has other plans. A one-eyed, one-armed, one-legged Spanish admiral who somehow functions as three men. He turns the bay into a death trap. His soldiers dig trenches, reinforce bastions, and wait for the British to sweat themselves into submission. Vernon, meanwhile, is too confident to notice the universe sharpening its knives. He unloads troops into the swampy shoreline, a steaming cauldron of disease and despair, and orders them to attack San Felipe Fortress, a towering wall of stone guarded by fewer than 4,000 Spanish defenders. Easy, he thinks. Quick victory like Portobello. Except Cartagena isn't Portobello. It's hell with humidity. Within days, the British camp becomes a biohazard. Mosquitoes hum like an air raid siren. Dysentery rips through the ranks, turning every latrine into a war crime. Men collapse under the weight of their armor and the sheer absurdity of dying in a swamp for trade rights. The stench of death hangs so thick, you could butter it. Officers issue contradictory orders between bouts of vomiting. Every barrel of water tastes like despair. Still, Vernon presses on. Cannon fire thunders. The jungle echoes with screams. For every Spanish soldier who falls, 5 British sailors die of dehydration or dysentery. Blas de Lezo moves like a ghost through the smoke, directing defenses with his remaining limbs and an attitude that says, "You picked the wrong cripple to mess with." After weeks of agony, the British finally assault the main fortress. The Spanish unleash musket fire, grenades, and gravity itself, rolling boulders down the walls onto anyone foolish enough to climb. The attack disintegrates in chaos. Officers die in puddles. Soldiers flee in terror. Even the drummers drop their sticks and run. By the end of it, Vernon's proud armada is reduced to a floating morgue. Out of 27,000 men, barely a quarter survive. Thousands never fired a shot. They just drowned, rotted, or exploded internally. The once invincible fleet limps away under the Caribbean sun, leaving Blas de Lezo victorious and unbothered, standing amid the ruins like a ghost who just humiliated an empire. Back in London, Vernon's dispatches stop arriving. The newspapers, so loud after Portobello, go quiet. No medals this time. No tavern songs, just silence, and the smell of empire rotting in the tropics. The war that started with an ear has now lost its nerve, its fleet, and most of its bowel control. Among the lucky few who escape Cartagena's tropical blender is a young colonial officer named Lawrence Washington. Yes, that Washington. He's the older half-brother of George, and at this point, he's just a wide-eyed Virginian nobleman desperate to prove himself. When he signed up to fight under Vernon, he pictured glory. Cannons booming, flags waving, heroic portraits in oil. What he got instead was dysentery, mosquitoes, and a crash course in why British imperial hubris smells like rotting salt pork. Lawrence sails with Vernon's fleet as part of a colonial regiment known as Gooch's American Volunteers, a name that already sounds like the losing team. These volunteers were promised adventure and honor. They got fever, confusion, and a commander whose main strategy was yelling louder than the weather. Out of the 3,000 colonials who arrived in Cartagena, fewer than 600 will make it home. Most never fire a shot. They simply melt into the mud, undone by disease and dehydration, long before the Spaniards could bother to shoot them. Lawrence somehow survives, possibly out of pure spite. He watches Vernon's campaign collapse like a damp biscuit and realizes the British Empire might not be the flawless war machine the propaganda promised. He returns to Virginia pale, coughing, and permanently unimpressed. His experience leaves him skeptical of grand British leadership, a family trait that will come in handy a generation later when his little brother starts lighting fuses in 1776. Still, Lawrence tries to make sense of the nightmare. When he buys a plantation along the Potomac a few years later, he names it Mount Vernon, in honor of the admiral who nearly got him killed. Historians like to debate whether that name was meant as flattery or sarcasm. After Cartagena, it's probably both. Naming his estate after Vernon is like naming your dog Traffic Accident, affectionate in theory, traumatic in origin. He fills the estate with books, naval memorabilia, and a stubborn sense that empire isn't all it's cracked up to be. To visiting guests, he talks about duty and honor, but you can tell his eyes drift whenever someone mentions the tropics. He's still seeing Cartagena. The stench, the heat, the bodies. Every glass of wine tastes faintly of quinine and regret. So yes, Lawrence Washington survives. The hero who wasn't, carrying the memory of Britain's dumbest war into the next century. And in one of history's favorite inside jokes, the estate he named after his doomed commander will become home to the man who finally tells the British Empire to get lost. What began as a colonial squabble over a jarred ear mutates into a full-blown geopolitical circus. By 1742, Britain and Spain have dragged half of Europe into the brawl, and the War of Jenkins Ear quietly merges into the War of Austrian Succession, a title that sounds elegant until you realize it's basically Europe's Group Chat Meltdown, 1740 edition. Your pickled ear, once a minor prop in Parliament, has now set off chain reactions stretching from Florida's swamps to Flanders' mud. Spain and Britain are the main antagonists, but everyone else decides to RSVP to chaos. France joins in because it's France. Austria defends a throne. Prussia picks a fight just because it can. And the Netherlands sigh collectively and build more dikes. It's less a war and more a continental group project, powered by caffeine and stupidity. The Caribbean burns as privateers raid sugar ports, and fleets clash for islands most Europeans couldn't locate on a map. In North America, colonial militias raid Spanish Florida, burning villages in the name of security, which in practice means we were bored. In the Mediterranean, British and Spanish ships exchange cannon fire over who controls Gibraltar, while in the Atlantic, merchant convoys get shredded by storms and privateers alike. Every empire calls it strategy. It's really just maritime slapstick. The costs skyrocket. Britain spends millions of pounds, loses tens of thousands of men, and gains precisely nothing. Spain, battered but unbroken, loses ships but keeps its trade routes. France gleefully watches both bleed money and prepares its own imperial revenge tour. It's the 18th century version of an economic crash, except instead of markets collapsing, it's people. Meanwhile, back in London, the public has lost the plot. Nobody remembers what the war is actually about. Ask 10 people, and you'll get 10 answers. Trade rights, honor, the Queen of Austria, Jenkins' Ear, or possibly God's will. The propaganda posters are still patriotic, but the enthusiasm has evaporated. Taverns that once sang about glory now grumble about taxes. The Portobello medals gather dust. Diplomats try to rename and reorganize the mess, as if branding will fix logistics. The War of Jenkins' Ear quietly disappears from the official paperwork, swallowed by the bigger, sexier Austrian succession. But the irony is delicious. One drunken border incident over sugar profits has just helped trigger a war stretching across 4 continents. Your ear, that sad floating relic in its jar, has outlived its owner as a cause. It's been paraded, mythologized, and politically exploited. Now it's just a metaphor in motion, bobbing through history as proof that humanity's greatest catalyst for global conflict is still ego dressed up as honor. Just when Britain thinks Spain is finished, sunken, humiliated, and bleeding out in the tropics, the old empire snarls back like a cornered jaguar in a powdered wig. The Spanish crown unleashes its privateers, those government-approved pirates who make bureaucracy look sexy. Overnight, the Caribbean turns from a British playground into a Spanish buffet. These corsairs aren't amateurs. They know every current, every shoal, every shortcut through the islands. Their ships, smaller and faster than Britain's lumbering beasts, swoop down on merchant convoys like mosquitoes on a sweaty tourist. British sloops vanish, sugar ships burn, rum distilleries explode in apocalyptic barbecues. Jamaica, once the empire's cash register, becomes a fire hazard with palm trees. The Spanish captains treat it like a national sport. They raid Barbados, plunder Montserrat, and torch sugar mills, with the gleeful energy of men avenging centuries of smugness. They even grab a few British governors for ransom, a deeply personal form of Yelp review. Spain's newspapers, usually half asleep, now brag about La venganza del imperio. The old lion might limp, but it still has teeth. Meanwhile, Britain's propaganda machine scrambles to spin the losses. London prints heroic sketches of burning plantations, titled Minor Setbacks on the Road to Glory. Merchants weep into their ledgers as insurance rates skyrocket. Admiral Vernon, now sulking in Jamaica, blames everyone except himself. The weather, the ships, the humidity, possibly you. His 6 ships only motto has aged about as well as warm milk. The irony is unbearable. Britain went to war for sugar profits, and now it's losing sugar faster than it can ship soldiers. The Caribbean economy starts coughing up blood. Sailors desert, planters panic, and enslaved laborers whisper that the chaos might finally crack the colonial order. The empire can't tell what's rotting faster: its crops, its morale, or its reputation. Spain, for its part, is smug but exhausted. Its privateers grow rich, but its treasury still bleeds. Both sides claim victory in newspapers, while quietly begging their accountants to find the money for another year of pointless warfare. Yet, for all the damage, the message is clear. Spain is no corpse. She's the stubborn grandmother of empires. Slower, crankier, but absolutely capable of smacking Britain with her cane when provoked. By 1745, the war's tone has shifted from triumph to attrition. The Caribbean is a graveyard of burned plantations and bloated egos. Britain's airborne crusade has turned into an ulcer that won't heal, and every Spanish cannon that fires feels like history whispering, "You started this over cartilage, idiots." 8 years. 8 expensive, fever-ridden, diarrhea-scented years. And for what? The Grand War of Jenkins' Ear ends not with triumph or transformation. but with everyone broke, miserable, and pretending it was worth it. Britain's treasury is hemorrhaging silver, like a stabbed piggy bank. Spain's navy is in tatters, and half the Caribbean smells like something that died in a sugar vat. By 1748, both empires are done. The soldiers are dead, the admirals disgraced, and the politicians desperate to sweep the whole debacle under the world's fanciest rug: diplomacy. Enter the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, the international equivalent of two drunks apologizing at closing time. The document restores all captured territories to their pre-war owners, meaning every fort, island, and port goes right back to whoever had it before. No new land, no reparations, no justice. It's a historical Cottrell plus easy. The British Parliament declares victory anyway, mostly because admitting defeat would require honesty. Newspapers run headlines like "Peace achieved, British honor intact," while quietly omitting the small print that the war changed absolutely nothing. Spain keeps its colonies, Britain keeps its delusion, and Europe collectively decides to forget the entire thing ever happened. The War of Jenkins Ear, once shouted about in Parliament, sung about in pubs and carved into medals, vanishes into the footnotes of the War of Austrian Succession, buried under more respectable chaos. For those who lived it, though, the scars remain. Veterans come home maimed and penniless, their glory rewarded with debt and dysentery flashbacks. Plantation owners rebuild their estates on the same broken backs as before. The Caribbean stays hot, poor, and colonized. The real winners, as always, are disease, sugar merchants, and undertakers. Even the symbols of the war begin to rot. The medals tarnish, the flags fade, and your preserved ear, once paraded as divine justification for empire, quietly decomposes in a forgotten cabinet, its alcohol evaporated, its purpose obsolete. The empire that glorified your suffering can't even be bothered to remember it. In the end, the only thing Britain successfully conquered was itself, drowned in its own propaganda and bureaucracy. Spain survives by default, the geopolitical equivalent of falling, asleep during an argument, and waking up technically victorious. 8 years, thousands of lives, and one preserved ear later, the world looks exactly the same. Congratulations, Empire. You've just spent nearly a decade proving that pride can be fatal, but at least it's historically documented. You don't die a hero. You don't even die rich. You just fade. After the speeches, the songs, the medals, and the wars, Robert Jenkins drifts quietly out of public view. The human headline no one bothers to reread. Parliament moves on to new scandals, the newspapers chase fresher gossip, and your name, once shouted in pubs across London, dissolves like cheap ink in brandy. No parades, no portraits, no pension. The empire that rallied around your ear forgets your face. You return to the sea for a few uneventful voyages, grow older, and eventually retire to a modest life on land. When you die, sometime around 1749, the papers barely mention it. The man who started a war doesn't even get a paragraph. History shrugs, closes the file, and files you away under minor curiosities. Meanwhile, your ear, the most famous piece of cartilage in Georgian England, vanishes into rumor. Some say it dried up and crumbled to dust. Others insist it still floats somewhere in an unlabeled jar in a London archive, quietly haunting the shelf between empire and absurdity. Either way, it never got the respect it earned for doing more geopolitical damage than most monarchs. The war you unintentionally inspired becomes a footnote, overshadowed by grander conflicts with better branding. The British forget it because it ended in embarrassment. The Spanish forget it because they won by doing absolutely nothing, and the rest of the world never cared in the first place. Centuries later, though, the internet stumbles upon you. a forgotten sea captain whose severed ear sparked an international disaster. The story resurfaces, and the absurdity finally gets its spotlight. You become a meme, a trivia fact, a punchline with historical footnotes. YouTube narrators resurrect your legend with dramatic lighting and ironic humor. For the first time, people laugh with history instead of sleeping through it. No statues, no ships named in your honor, just a digital afterlife. The kind of immortality no 18th century sailor could imagine. Maybe that's fitting. You never asked for war, fame, or politics. You just wanted justice. And perhaps a refund on your medical expenses. Instead, you became proof that history doesn't need heroes to make noise. Sometimes, all it takes is one severed ear, one overconfident empire, and 3 centuries worth of disbelief. And so, Robert Jenkins, forgotten merchant and accidental chaos engine, finally gets what the British Empire never gave you, a proper audience. Congratulations. Your ear went viral again.